Hello everybody, welcome back to Off Meta Musings. One of the most common questions that you see asked pretty much everywhere is, are my fighters good? Should I be taking them? What makes a good fighter? And one of the main metrics used to try and figure this out and to try and explain this is damage efficiency, or a points per wound rating. Now, for some people, this can be a bit challenging to understand. Should you only be taking fighters with a good damage efficiency? Is anything else bad? What is a good damage efficiency overall? So today I wanted to take a look at that value and really explain its pros, its cons, and where and why you should be using it to analyze your fighters. In effect, the damage efficiency of a fighter is the cost of the fighter divided by the chance of rolling a hit times by the hit damage plus the chance of rolling a crit times by the crit. What you'll get from this is effectively a value that tells you, okay, this is the amount of points that I'm paying per damage point that I can reliably put on enemy fighters. Now, in your games of Warcry, we'll know that different fighters have different toughnesses, and your chance to wound those fighters, and subsequently the amount of damage you're going to do to them, is going to change depending on whatever your strength is. So that's why I use a weighted damage system, and you'll see this amongst other creators. Weightings might be a bit different from mine, but generally we're all trying to come to the same conclusion. You'll see in my videos that I'll be working on an assumption that 25% of fighters fielded will be toughness 3, 50% will be toughness 4, and 25% will be toughness 5. And once you take all of that into account, you can divide this by the cost of the fighter to get your points per wound value. There is something very important to mention about this. Your points per wound really only depends on two things. It cares about how many points your fighter costs and how much damage it does. So because it only looks at those two things, it's really disregarding any other stats of the fighter. It's disregarding the toughness, how many wounds it has, any abilities that it might have, or its movement. So it's not great to use for those fighters that are utility fighters. Maybe they have good abilities, or fighters that are generally very fast. So to visualize where different fighters sit on this scale of efficiency, we have this chart here, and it essentially plots your average damage over your points. And there's a bunch of different brackets that you'll be able to see within that. You've got anything sub 100 points, which I'm going to broadly refer to as chaff models. Now, different people have different ideas on what makes a chaff model, but I'm going to put 100 points here just to have a value to go on. Next, we've got elite models, so models between 100 and around about 150 points. You've got heavy fighters and heroes, which will be anything from 150 points going all the way up to 375. And then you've got monsters. So anything above 375 points is generally where you'll see the monster range. We've got the average damage efficiency that you'll be able to see in the middle. This sits at a value of 35.19 across the entire population of fighters within Warcry. Anything above this line will generally be seen as more efficient, because you will in effect be paying less points for the amount of damage it puts out. And anything under this line will generally be seen as less efficient. You'll have seen me talk in my guides about fighters in the top third or having a damage efficiency of 25 or less. Any fighter with a damage efficiency of 25 or less is generally going to be seen as quite desirable, because you'll be paying a good amount of points for the amount of damage that it puts out, and that's generally, when we're talking about damaging fighters, where we'll be looking to purchase from. Something to mention is that you do see a lot of the more very efficient fighters in the sub 200 point range. This is generally down to more expensive fighters having better other stats like movement, toughness, wounds. A lot of them have the fly rune mark, and that really pushes up their points, which overall lowers their damage efficiency. So this is why I was talking about how you shouldn't only rely on this value as a metric on how good or how efficient a fighter is. When I'm picking my fighters, I generally like to take a look at anything with average damage efficiency or higher, especially if the niche that I'm looking to fill is specifically for a fighter that I'm going to be using to hunt other fighters. I've put a couple of points on here. We've got our friend at the bottom, the Chameleon Skink with Blowpipe, and we also have the Graveguard with Great Blade. You can see it's very efficient, being very far away from the top third line that I put on here. Storm Fiend with Doomflare Gauntlets, again, very efficient, and you've got the Chimera right at the top, doing the highest damage, but also at the highest points level. Now, What is this good for? Well, it's very good for comparing similar fighters' damage and comparing different weapon loadouts on those fighters, especially as I've said before, between fighters that are at or below 200 points. We can see this example with these desecrators here. We've got the statue smasher hammer and the iconoclast warpick. We can see that warpicks have better damage than hammers across the board thanks to that additional attack, and therefore they have a higher weighted damage and a better damage efficiency between the two. What it's not good for, however, is taking abilities into account. Again, if we look at these two fighters here, we've got the bloated ones, we've got the bloated one with claw and bloated one with net. The bloated one with claw has the same stats as the net, but it's got the additional attack, so it would naturally have a better damage efficiency, but the net has an ability that gives it effectively an extra attack that's particularly good against high toughness targets that always wins on threes, and this isn't something that you would see just by looking at that damage efficiency factor alone. It's also not good for more expensive fighters, fast fighters, or fighters with the fly room mark. Generally in Warcry, those fighters are going to be paying a lot for those stats, so damage efficiency will suffer. We can see here that the points per wound of the Varangard was sitting at 37.1, and the points per wound of the Kellyan King is sitting at 40.7. They both have very high movement of 10, and the fly room mark in the case of the Kellyan King. In conclusion, damage efficiency. It only cares about how many points a fighter costs and how much damage it does at those different toughness brackets. It's not great for utility fighters or fighters which will use their abilities to boost their damage output or the damage output of their friends. It's not great for fast fighters or those fighters with the fly room mark due to high points cost associated. It is good, however, for getting an idea of how points efficient the fighter is, and it's not the be all and end all in choosing which fighters, but you can take it as a good start to filter out the bulk of the generally poor choices that we do see in Warcry.